Well, there's a new Thor film in cinemas at the moment, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to take a closer look at one of the more unusual Thor action figure releases in recent years. And that is the legendary Marvel Superheroes Thor figure from Diamond Select Toys. And this is essentially a re-release or repurposed figure based on the Mego release from the 1970s. But it's a bit more than that, it's a little bit more deluxe because of course it's not just a re-release of the classic Thor, it also reimagines the Thor for the modern day as well and gives him a whole new outfit. Plus they come up with an extra additional costume for one that was never released, but again it's in the style of Mego from the 1970s. So these deluxe sets, and they did quite a few of these, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Captain America. These sets are essentially re-releasing that figure, but also taking it a step further and reimagining them for today as well, which is a really nice touch. And I think it's particularly exciting given that we've seen a rebirth in Mego in recent years, producing all sorts of fantastic new figures. But the one license they haven't been producing is Marvel characters. So these limited deluxe sets are even more appreciated now. So to kick off with, let's look at the packaging, which we can see is kind of unusual. It is in that oblong shape. This isn't what we'd used to seeing with Mego figures, which are usually on a blister card with that sort of bubble packaging, which is always very nice. This obviously feels a lot more deluxe. It has a much bigger presentation, much bigger space. On the one hand, we can see the figure inside a box within the box, so to speak, but on the right hand side, most of this window packaging is displaying the other costumes that are available, and of course they have this banner image telling us that this is a limited edition collector's set, and it looks very fancy and it looks very nice. On the flip side of the packaging, on the reverse, we have this wonderful image of Thor flying towards us, and it is completely text-free and unspoiled, and I have to say this is very impressive. They've kept the art style consistent with the time period being the 1970s. These are the kind of images that we were used to seeing from Marvel at this time, both in the comic books, but also in their designs that were on action figures. So this looks really cool, it's very fun, and it is very displayable. You can put this on your shelf and it's always going to pop out nicely. As I said, inside the box is a mini box which has the original Thor figure in there. Now this is the reproduction of Thor as he appeared in the Mego range back in the 1970s. I think they've done a really nice job of the figure, but we'll get onto that in a moment. So the package they've used here is obviously a lot more slimlined. It is just the size and shape of the figure. It is quite narrow, and there's not an awful lot of detail here. We do have the Mighty Thor logo, which is nice, and then we have the branding at the bottom there. On the side panel, we have a couple of images of other figures that are available in this line. Of course we have Thor, but we also have Wolverine there. And then on the reverse of this packaging, we have that image of Thor again, but this time it's elongated, so we have more of the actual image, the drawing of Thor flying towards us, which looks wonderful, and again, completely free from text, apart from the logos at the very bottom of the box. And I have to say, this looks absolutely great. And I really appreciate them taking the time and the effort to do this, because they could have just left this blank or just put some simple text on there, copyright text or whatever, but as it is, this just transforms this packaging and just makes it really fun. So let's take a look at the figure himself. Now of course this is a reproduction of the Mego figure as it appeared all the way back in the 1970s, and I have to say visually I think they've done a pretty bang up job. This looks pretty faithful to what was released all those years ago, and it looks really bright and colourful. Now I have to say I really like this head sculpt. Now I know some people will disagree when it comes to the hair choice, but this is in keeping with the style of Mego in the 1970s. I think they've done a really good job of recreating it, but I actually think it stands up even by today's standards. This is a pretty good sculpt. This is definitely recognisable as Thor. There's no mistake in that. I think they've done a very good job with that sculpt, and I think the hair works really well. I think that doll hair can definitely be hit or miss, and of course over time it will become unruly and come out of place and start to look pretty terrible if it's not well maintained. But nevertheless, I do think it looks really good and it's quite visually striking and feels entirely appropriate for this character. The costume design and the materials used for the central body of the figure is pretty simple. Again, it is very consistent with the style of the 1970s, but it is very colourful, and I still think they've done a pretty good job of bringing this character to life in this scale and this form. And I think this is a really fun figure to look at just because it is so colourful. The one area that definitely leaves something to be desired though is the cape. This is a very thin, cheap material and it is virtually see-through, and it doesn't feel very authentic. And it's not quite big enough for Thor either. The boots, again, very simple. They're just a bright yellow rubber with a black tip at the top there. It looks fine, it does the job. By today's standards, of course, it looks a little bit clumsy, but by 70s Mego standards, this is not bad at all. And of course, he has the standard Mego body, so we all know what to expect when it comes to articulation and from those hands and what they can and can't grip. Now, as you'd expect from Mego, he is fairly light on accessories, but he does have a couple, including his helmet and Mjolnir, his hammer. I have to say the stem of that hammer is a little bit too long for my liking, and of course it is all painted with the one silver colouring. There's no added textures or paint apps running through this whatsoever. The helmet has a chrome finish, so you can see your reflection in it absolutely perfectly, which is lovely, and it catches the light great. It just doesn't sit on his head very well, not with this hair. So if you can get it to rest on, it's always going to seem to pop up over his head and look a little bit silly and ridiculous, and 9 times out of 10 I just don't think you're going to want to use this. That said, they have thought through the hammer a bit more because they've created an indentation in there so that he can grip it perfectly, which is fantastic. Everyone wants Thor to be able to hold his hammer, and if he can't do that, then that's always going to be a huge problem. But here, they've accounted for that and allowed him to be able to grip it, which I think is fantastic. And as you can see, once the hammer has been affixed to his grip, it actually looks pretty good. And for the sake of a size comparison, here he is standing next to the Marvel Famous Covers Thor that was released in the sort of mid to late 90s. As you can see, they went for a much bigger, broader, larger than life approach of their body mould and sculpt, so obviously he does tend to be a lot broader and a lot taller than our 8-inch Thor here. But nevertheless, I think you get a sense of the size of this figure. He is essentially your standard Mego size, which isn't really appropriate for the God of Thunder. He should be a little bit bigger, but hey, this was the methodology of Mego all those years ago. And I'm sure that fans from that era of toy making will be delighted with the faithfulness of this release. So, moving on to the second costume that's in the box, we have the opportunity to have a more modern Thor with a more modern approach to making a figure of this scale. The first thing I would say about this costume is that it is a real pain to get on. It's very, very fiddly and not the easiest in the world. But having said that, I do think it is absolutely worth your time and effort because I happen to love this costume and I really like how they've rendered this in this scale. I think it looks really, really good actually, and I'm very, very pleased with it. Now, the first thing that I have to address here, though, is of course I am using the same head as we just saw previously. The package does come with an alternate head. This is the one that should be used with this costume because it is a more modern approach, i.e. it has hard hair, it is a sculpted, moulded hair, rather than using doll's hair. That said, I'm not overly thrilled with this sculpt. It looks a little bit clumsy. It doesn't have much in the way of paint apps when it comes to the hair, so it just looks a bit too bright and too gold. It would have helped have been a bit of a wash over this. His eyesight looks a little bit lopsided as well. It doesn't look quite right, not quite even. The sculpt itself is absolutely fine. There's a bit more detailing in the face, which is nice, but it's not fantastic. But the main reason I haven't put him on to display for you here today is because I could not get this in to the space. This peg hole here, this giant peg on the neck is just too thick, and it just, with the dangly hair pieces, it just became a real nightmare to get in. It just would not squeeze in for whatever reason. That said though, I do absolutely love this costume. I love the attention to detail. I always love that foil effect that they have for armour that we see on Mego figures. It always catches the light so beautifully. But I really love the faux leather effect, both on the cuffs and on the main tunic there. It looks great. And I also really like the buttons and of course the sort of satchel and belt. I think they've done a really nice job of creating this leather effect that obviously isn't anywhere near like a leather material. It's a very thin paper-like material, but it looks very effective, and I think that's great. The cape this time is also a significant step up. It's more of a cotton material, so it's a little bit thicker. It's also a little bit bigger as well, so it has a little bit more gravitas to it, and I think this works a heck of a lot better. He's also gifted updated boots as well. These are pretty thick rubber and they look pretty nice. There's not much in the way of paint apps, but they're nicely sculpted and they look pretty true to the source material. Now, this version of Thor also comes with some extra bits and pieces, and some of the pieces are even updated, which is really nice. So, of course, we have this extra head, this brand new head sculpt, but he also comes with a brand new helmet as well. This time we have that chrome effect, but also we have the white of the wings, and I have to say this fits on his head much better, so this would have been much more successful. He also has an additional pair of hands as well. He has 2 closed fists and 2 open hands, which is great, and these are obviously much more detailed and a vast improvement over the traditional Mego hands. But he also comes with an updated brand new version of Mjolnir as well. This has a much shorter shaft, which is fantastic, and it's also painted, so we have the brown of the handle and of course the grey stone effect of the actual hammer, which is fantastic. Taking a closer look at those hands to see how they perform, here's the open hand of course. You can see there's actually some nice sculpting there, the individual lines on the palm of the hands, the fingers outstretched there, and just elevates the whole figure to another level in terms of detail, which is absolutely brilliant. Likewise, we can see Mjolnir. This fits perfectly into the fist hand through a tight little hole there. He holds it with no issues, and it looks really, really good. And as I said, just elevates the figure up a notch or two. And even better, on his faux leather belt, there is a space to be able to plug Mjolnir in there and hold it, which I think is really cool, really nice touch and unexpected, so this is great stuff. And then finally, here he is standing next to that Marvel Famous Covers Thor again. In terms of shape and size, there's no real difference, but hopefully you'll be able to see there is a huge difference when it comes to the quality of the costume, the detail and texturing, and the overall presentation. I think this is a much sharper, much better release. Now there is one final costume in this box, and that is the Donald Blake version of the character, which is fantastic. This is a character obviously that's been largely forgotten, it seems, in recent years. That is the alter ego of Thor. Old school fans like myself will be delighted to actually have him represented in figure form, although I fully admit he's probably not the most exciting character in the world or has the most exciting look visually. It is very, very cool to have him in the collection. And I have to say, I think this head sculpt is actually pretty decent. It does suffer from the same issues when it comes to the paint apps. Again, it is that big bright mop of yellow hair there. Sadly, it is not tempered with a wash, which would have really helped this. But otherwise, I do think this is a pretty decent sculpt and a pretty decent attempt to render a different likeness for Thor in the form of Don Blake. Now, as much as I like that we have this figure and he has his Dr. Scrubs costume, I will admit that the tailoring is a little off here and a little bit sloppy, I think. The actual underneath of the green costume is just a little bit too thick and a little bit too baggy and loose, so that if you put the overcoat over it, the white doctor's coat over that, it tends to look a little bit padded, it looks a little bit strange. As you can see, it's bursting there. I've tied that button to close it, but it very much wants to pop open at any moment, and it does look a little bit unflattering. But as I say, the material for the Dr. Scrubs is quite nicely rendered, it is quite a thick quality, which is nice, and it is a very bright, luminous sort of aqua green or blue, depending on what your eyes are showing you here. And the shoes, of course, are the simple rubber shoes that we're used to seeing on Mego figures. He also comes with a handful of really cool accessories though, including his staff, of course, so key for transforming into Thor. He has a stethoscope, and he also has the surgical face mask and head covering. Now, these extra bits and pieces are very hit and miss. I do really like this staff. I think it's got excellent sculpting. It looks really good, very gnarly, and quite realistic, which is cool. The stethoscope is a single plastic piece. It tends to stick out when you put it around his neck, so you have to angle that very carefully if you want it to put it on display and look halfway decent. But it's a nice touch, it's nice to have. The face mask is fine, although it does tend to obscure all of his face if you put it over his mouth. The headpiece, not so much. This does tend to look a little bit silly. But all in all, I do think this is a really fun, nice extra, and a different approach to this character, which I definitely appreciate. But that's not all, because they also include this fantastic mini booklet as well, which tells us all about the history of the Thor character in toy form. Obviously they focus on the Mego release, but they actually look across all the years as well. Its earliest years in the 1960s, right the way through to the 2000s, which is very, very cool. And then there's a little bit of history about the character in comic books, and of course this special Mego release and how they came to approach some of these new visualizations for this figure, which is a tremendous fun and very nicely produced. So there you have it, one character, one figure, 3 different iterations, 3 different distinct looks, and 3 different approaches. I have to say, I really, really like these sets. The love, care, attention to detail is absolutely palpable. You can see just how much effort has gone into these figures, how much love there is from fans and the people creating these figures to bring them to life. I think they've done a really nice job, and they definitely feel very deluxe, and there's definitely a real attempt here to give everyone what they want, regardless of what era you collect your toys from. So I really like these. I think these are really fun, and it's nice to see Thor given this treatment. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.